My content is for 13 and up, or adult collection of the product.
Hello everyone! Before we continue with the video, subscribe to the channel with bell notifications on. So I also want to give a huge shout out to Think and Magic from WBO, and as well as any other help from the WBO Discord, just for any tiering and extra help for the stuff, just to make sure I placed it all fair and accurately. It is based on HASBRO only, not Cutie only. Either way, whatever is at the top, it would be virtually the same for Cutie only. The other thing I want to say is just because, especially with how Hasbro has been and how I've been very much hammering on this message, we have done a video that has been a rise and downfall of Hasbro Part 2 that covers the influencer side, the Cutie in general, Hasbro's handled it, and really just the mistreatment of the brand. The other thing I want to say is that there is no Cutie gravity rings for this because the things are plastic. Anyways, let's begin. Starting us off in the tier list is going to be the chip or drive chip. Now in this, we're going to be going over all of them. Now while most of this would be linked to also stamina, the issue with Hasbro is that because of how weak the actual resistance on a lot of them are, they're not really that usable. So unfortunately, we do have to go kind of closer to tightness, but I should generally say also, whenever I do a tier list, it's never in order on that list on like whatever's in C, what's the best within just C, whatever. So it's just whatever's on the list is what I count it as. Now we have our D tier for drive chips. In this, we have Rocktavor, which generally, D is just going to be really weak, not that consistent, very easy to burst. Ifritor, kind of the same boat as Rocktavor, to be quite honest. There are some where it could maybe get bumped up that I kind of felt on Ifritor, but I do generally think once you use it a bit, it does kind of just die off. Regnor, also really not that good, too generic and not really tight at all. And for lefts, Lunor. Now the thing is with Lunor is that all the lefts are very similar, but I have tried to feel it, and Lunor does feel kind of a little bit weaker than the other ones. Next up we have C tier. Now in C tier, for slope resistance, this is where it is kind of just the average that you could probably feel for a Bay. Not where it's really that good, just okay enough. Fafnir, Cobra, Balkesh, Spryzen. They all kind of have like a copy and paste same feeling. They all feel very close to each other. I wouldn't really say one is truly better than the other. They're kind of just too close. Whichever one, I'd probably still lean towards maybe like Balkesh, Cobra, Fafnir, then maybe Spryzen. Then after we have the other right cores, Baldurov, Bellfire 1, Muramasa, Linworm, Nemesis. Again, similar to the lefts, these all feel very similar to each other. I don't really think one is truly superior to the other one, so it would just really be up to you for which one you'd want to pick for these. Maybe like these two, and then after maybe like these, for maybe like if I tried to order them, but either way, if you're just going by resistance, these are kind of just a little bit close to each other just for generic, so. B tier is now where it's the above average slopes. So we have Valtryek, or Valtryek Evo, Phoenix. I would probably just still pick the original Valtryek over the Evo Valtryek, and probably Phoenix over the Evo Valtryek, and maybe just the regular Valtryek over the Phoenix. They'll also, just to go over, because I did say, these are very close to each other, I would say. In the Phoenix one too, the Phoenix was almost going to be the same as the Evo Bellfire, but I found Bellfire, and especially the other one, a little bit better than the Phoenix. Now these are the A tier, nothing in S, unfortunately, because these are just really nicely tight. Obviously too, I should mention that either one of these, if you want to use for stamina or attack, you know, these can actually have some use because of how tight they are, so especially Perseus, since Perseus is a lot easier to get than Evo Bellfire, so if you're trying to do Cutie only or even just Cutie against any Hasbro stuff, I do highly recommend either Perseus or Evo Bellfire. They're both very, very close to each other for tightness. Now moving on, we have our actual Cutie Blade tier list. So in this, we're going to be going over all of them. I will make sure to have footage accompanying anything if I'm talking about something specific, as per usual. But regardless, we're going to get started. In the hated tier, we have Astral. Now Astral has no metal, no rubber, and hollowed out. For both spins, and right spin it is absolutely terrible. It has very poor stamina, cannot really compete with any good contenders. It also does chip pretty easily, which is also a negative towards it. The other thing as well, the left side is also terrible. It cannot compare to Drain, it doesn't compare to Wrath, Vanish, Roar. It's actually the worst out of all of them. Surprise, surprise, when you basically take away anything that made it good, it's actually pretty garbage. Next up we have the D tier. So with Vanish, with no actual rubber and the fact that it's pure plastic and hollow, while you could maybe say that it could work as an equalizer, it still does pretty much fail for defense, fail for actual stamina, same spin, even opposite spin, there are way better options, and it gets murdered by Drain Fafnir, so yeah, pretty low on the list. Devil and Dynamite are basically for the exact same reasons. They are far too passive to actually be used for anything attack. So I don't even know, I suppose your use would be, I guess, just stamina. Also, a big L on Hasbro is because there is no actual gear, right? This is F gear, right? They took away all the gears and everything that made sense for Belial and its design. Because of that, they're basically hollow shells of what they could have been. Next up is Magma and Gilded. So with Gilded, it doesn't really have that good of stamina. Like, it has weight, but the stamina is not really there. And Magma is pretty much on the same boat where it's not really good at anything specific. It's just not. Now, here's where this becomes a little bit interesting. For the attackers, if you factor in G13, their placement goes a little bit different. Now with Stone and with Salvage and Ultimate and any real attacker, they could potentially be bumped up, but really it's only like 3 that maybe get the benefit. So with Stone's issue and with Ultimate's issue is that even on the tightest slopes possible, even on a tight performance tip, because of their designs or how hollow they are, so this one's more of the design, this one is just how hollow it is, they just die significantly to their own recoil and make it impossible to get any real use out of it. All right, next up on the tier, we have C tier. For this one, we're gonna get started. Guilty, even with that G13, doesn't really do anything too significant. The issue is, other than weight, rounded off contact points, and also again, hollowed, so it doesn't hit as hard as it could. Nightmare is still the best Lunar to this day. It's too inoffensive to do anything for attack. You wouldn't use it for stamina because there are way better options. So then after for Berserk and then after Katana, both of these are just kind of meh for attack. They're just kind of like, you know, obviously stamina no. Also how hollow they are does affect them quite a bit, since their underside is, now I gotta mention it, but it's basically anytime they're really hollowed really bad, their undersides are basically terrible. They have no proper support to themselves. They have no real impact or weight for themselves. There's no support, so that's why a lot of these just fail and die. Devastates, if you factor in basically the tightest drive chip possible, you can kind of get it to work for at least attack, at least better than Decay can. There's still better options, but the issue too is, again, since obviously there's an F gear slot here, this empty area hurts it a lot, but really these are the main ones that hit, but because of these ones also matter too, it does affect it a little bit. And also Glory, but in high mode. The reason for this is that because in high mode, all this bottom part has no support, so the stamina is absolutely terrible. When you flip it, then it's a little bit different. Okay, then after we have to our final tier for the blades, which is B. B is the most charitable that you can be, and obviously we've already mentioned Salvage, but let's talk about it anyways. So Salvage, with its design, other than really just a recoil, doesn't hit too crazy. Now, if you do, you know, G13, whatever, then it does boost it up a bit. Despite its rounder shape, it is still pretty offensive only because of these parts here. But if Hasbro basically took away these parts and it was just this shape, yeah, it would be terrible. So this being here is not too bad. It's still B tier because it's not too consistent, but if you get it to where you add that G13, then yeah, obviously this is going to be a lot better. Then after for lefts, we have Roar and we have Wrath. Yeah, both of these have exceptional stamina where they can kind of compete with Drain Fafnir. It would still probably go to Drain, but you could maybe get away with using them. Despite how hollowed they are, their stamina can kind of work, mostly just because of how round their shape is, though Wrath has a big weakness of recoil that Roar does not. So I would prefer Roar over Wrath. I would say in general, Roar is probably your best left spin stamina blade. And then after, for stamina, I think the order probably actually goes like this. We have Glory in low mode. Because of the support there, stamina is a lot better. Also because of how exposed these are, these don't do too much damage to it. The stamina, I would say, it's at least one of the best for QuadDrive. And in the same regard, Prominence and Cyclone here. Now, Prominence does kind of have use for same spin stamina. I would maybe lean towards opposite because that's the same for TAKARA, TOMY, and it's honestly kind of the same here. Cyclone can also work. Generally, though, if you did try to put these up against like higher up stuff like Tide Trip 2, I don't know, Hercules, or even Triumph, these do kind of falter a bit because of the hollowness. I think only Glory is the one that kind of just shines a bit more than the others. All right, now we're up to our disc tier list. So for this one, it's just generally how good's the stamina, how good's life after death, how much use does it have, how does it compare to previous stuff. The reality is a lot of them do struggle against like Hasbro's wheel, so it's not exactly like it's any fun. Like I'm not joking when I say that with Hasbro's QD discs, they still struggle to beat Hasbro's wheel because of how modified they are. Starting us off with our C tier. C tier is where they don't have much use for really stamina or attack, or just too kind of weak. For this, we're going to just separate it like this. So you can maybe put these lower because the stamina does kind of suck. Aqualon and Aqualon Dash, both of these are very just generic. They don't have really good stamina. If they're used for defense, then I don't really see any reason why you wouldn't use anything else above it on this list. Then after we have Karma and Diagram, whatever. So again, the issue of being hollowed and a lot of the underside, it does hurt them quite a bit. This is just really generic, I guess, if you wanted to use for attack. And this also, actually this shape wasn't too bad, but another issue is that with a lot of these stuff, they're kind of a little bit too small, or just have a terrible underside, so they couldn't really get used too much, but this is kind of whatever for attack. For both of these, now while I could factor in that Hasbro is compatible with S gear and D gear for TAKARA, TOMY, since this is Hasbro only, I can unfortunately not factor that in. Either way, yeah, both of these are just kind of meh. Lastly, we have QQ. So in both shape and design, it is a worse tapered. Now, here's where we get to the B tier. Now these are where you could kind of use them for either attack or just stamina. FQ has very good weight distribution and a good round edge shape. I do like it quite a bit. Honestly, it's one of my favorite new discs that Hasbro did. Then after Sequex, you could, I guess, use it for attack. Its stamina is also just kind of whatever compared to Hasbro's wheel. Doesn't really have anything that's too exceptional for it in its design with the blades that kind of go down to up, but I don't know, you could kind of get away with using it. Giga and Shot are also kind of hurt again by the underside and how hollowed they are, because their shapes are actually not bad at all, but because of how Hasbro modified it, their stamina is poor, I would say, compared to a lot of the stuff on the top. You could get away with using it still, but they're not too crazy. I do like Shot 2 for the general shape. It's not too bad, but again, the underside does kill it quite a bit, and especially for attack when you're trying to see how much of this part is actually going to hit it, because they're so thin. Next up in A, and only in A, is Hasbro's Over. Was almost as good as what it could have been. Again, underside terrible, so it barely compares to Hasbro's wheel. This still has similar use to how TAKARA, TOMY had it for attack and stamina. I put tapered above it just because, even though maybe this is better than tapered same spin, opposite goes to tapered. Very unfortunate how murdered this disc is. Speaking of tapered, for S tier tapered, the heaviest out of all of them, probably you could still get away with using this as same spin, and obviously opposite spin. It is very solid to use for cone shape stuff, and in general, a good disc. Alrighty, now we have got to the base QuadDrive performance sips. Now there's an important thing to mention, that even though placement of certain things are the way that they are, There is the other factor if you are using a base with a QuadDrive attachment, so technically some would go above than the other ones, but obviously we have to have it make sense. So with that being said, we're going to get started. At our bottom tier, we have Edge at like F, or even hate it. Now, the reason for this is that Edge has very poor stamina, poor balance, and there are way better things than it. Next up, we have D tier for the QuadDrive base performance tips. With Massive and Needle, they both suffer from HASBRO liking to flatten their balls. So that means that they have worse performance and stamina, are far more aggressive, and have no real use even if you wanted to use them. For this one, we have Mobius, and then after Extend Plus. So with Extend Plus and with Mobius, Mobius is really aggressive, it self-KOs too much, and the spring's really not that special. And this is kind of just, again, like a worse Zephyr for the shape and also the spring strength. Then after have Spiral and Jaggy, I think Jaggy is just an okay spring and Spiral is also just an okay spring. Neither of these are really that special for attack or that effective to really use, that you could get some use out of it with HASBRO only, so they have nothing to really offer. Shot is a sharp stamina tip. Now this is obviously based on the actual shot before it activates, but the stamina really isn't that good. Surprise, having a sharp like this does not work. If it was a wider cone shape, then maybe. Even if the spring strength is not too bad on it, stamina is really not there. We are now at our C tier. So again, even though some of these have good driver strength in terms of actual use for the bases, starting us off with our most aggressive Quattro. Quattro is pretty aggressive for it, so you could maybe use it. It's kind of consistent if you wanted to try to do attack with it. Fusion and All Might are kind of similar for how they did it. Fusion probably would have a lot more use than All Might, but generally a lot of these you'll notice the trend that they're very similar for the shape. These kind of have like kind of whatever use if you wanted to try for stamina, but not too special. With Zone, QuadDrive, kind of in the similar boat to, I would say, kind of like Quattro. It's like a weird Zephyr thing. I don't know, it can kind of work, but the stamina is not too crazy, and also the shape is not too crazy for the thing. Then after we have Zephyr and Assault. Both of these you could maybe get some mileage out of just trying to do attack with them and maybe getting away with it. Of course, there are better options, but at least for HASBRO only, these are the best things that you can probably try to use with them. Alrighty, next up we have B tier. So this is where the stamina is kind of exceptional. First going to the balls, they decided to not flatten. Guard and Orbit. I would like Orbit maybe a teensy bit more than Guard, but the stamina is alright for same spin. If you wanted to try opposite spin, I wish you the best of luck. A lot of this kind of feels more geared towards maybe more same spin stuff for stamina. That being said, it's kind of in the same boat as these last ones for gyro, for whatever this is supposed to be in just. Really more towards the same spin stamina, and this is a worse yielding. And at our A tier for the base performance tip, even though this is it's A just within the context of QuadDrive and also HASBRO only, because we literally got like nothing for real options, it's yielding. Yielding has, I would say, good stamina. You can even kind of get it to work opposite, kind of. We are now at the end, which is going to be the armor tips. So these are the attachments that you can use on QuadDrive, the whole point of the gimmick, right? The entire point. So now, we're going to go through all of them and figure out what's best to worst. In our hated tier, or the bottom, is going to be the Extend Plus attachment. Now actually, the stamina on it is probably, I would say, the best out of all of KD for same and opposite, but with HASBRO's stupid design flaw of their cheap plastic and how sharp it gets, and how fast it wears, it becomes useless to where it becomes far too aggressive and self-KOing to where you can barely get any actual use out of it. We then after have the D tier. So D is where these things, you can barely get them to work, or they're far too inconsistent to do anything special, or they just suck. Now for these, basically just, there's no real benefits to having a tall attacker with that height. It doesn't really do anything that special, and a little bit too passive. So for Venture, whatever this is supposed to be, for this, the same, and even the All Might attachment, they're kind of just poor because they have no real use for attack. Like, you don't really need attack in that height with the attachment, so they're kind of useless. The same in this regard, either not that much control or no real benefit, as well with what I believe is Quake and then after Shot. And obviously for our last two. As funny as the operate attachment is, even though it is semi-flat, it doesn't even have that much use. It was cool, but no real use for that height, and it doesn't really jump too crazy. Moment, you could argue for opposite spin, but because of how tall they are, it's very hard to argue this because they just fall down pretty easily. So maybe you could bump up moment, but self-KO risk and everything, I'm not too crazy on it. Next up we have our C tier. Now C is where it's a little bit more consistent for either same or opposite spin, or at least better enough to where it can be above it. For Quattro, for Merge, and for Unite, they're all in the same boat of just being kind of just like this weird sort of, it's basically fusion shape and not too crazy. You could get kind of, I guess, some use in like same spin stamina, I guess. But then after I have our wide ring stuff, so this is Defense, Universe, and Wave. That is always going to be hilarious to me. Basically, semi-flat, semi-flat. You could kind of get the same spin stamina. This one is just, the ball is a weirder shape, like it's more protruding outwards instead of just more kind of ballish. I don't know what they're doing. Press is in a similar vein to basically how it was affected. Rise, I don't even know if you could say opposite spin or even same spin. It's kind of just this weird thing where, because of the shape and everything, you can maybe kind of try to get a little bit to work, but it is hard. And Destroy is okay enough where you could, I guess, try to use it for that height, but honestly, it's not too consistent or not worth it. Then after we have B tier, Fugal has, I would say, good same spin stamina. It does work nice for same spin. Drift can kind of work opposite spin. The issue is the same as the Speedstorm one, although a little bit worse. It's not the easiest to equalize, and with no free spin, whatever, it's kind of in this weird, unique area for it. Then after for A tier, you have Octa and Never. Now, Never, I would say, is good same spin. Obviously, you should remember, too, that sharp point will wear down, and it'll be a little bit more aggressive. Same spin kind of work. Opposite spin, in general, opposite spin is very hard for a lot of this stuff. Because of how tall it is, it'll just fall down. But some of them can kind of work. Speaking of which, Octa, it is a worse kick, but it can still kind of work. For its shape, it has a wide enough base to give it support, and stamina is not too bad. So honestly, one of the better attachments that we've gotten. Now ending off our S tier, baby! We have Hasbro's Kick. Now I would generally say that Hasbro's Kick is honestly not that bad. They basically fixed the issue of kick where now the ring does not interfere with the battle at the end. Because the issue with kick before is they would scrape too much because it's a lot taller and elevated. They basically fixed that issue. Very good stamina overall. I'd say one of the really good upgrades that Hasbro's done to actually kick. What I would argue is slightly better is Hasbro's Revolve. Very good same spin stamina. Honestly, this is probably your more consistent thing that's closer to maybe like High Extend plus Dash for TAKARA TOMY for Hasbro. Very good stamina. It is kind of sucky that they locked this in a set. I do hope they reprint it. It is very good for stamina. And these are where the tips can kind of compete with something like maybe Bearing for Hasbro or like a lot of the higher tier stamina stuff. QuadDrive is finally complete. We have done the tier list. If I've forgotten anything, I do not care. I will just do it in a pinned comment and update it. I tried to cover basically as most as I could. Some things could get more talking about, but I feel for what we talked about and for the length, it is good. So ending off, I want to mention our store. It is an optional way to support the channel. And we have Burst Spriggan, we have the Ultimate Fusion DX set, we have other stuff in our shop. Again, I do appreciate any support regardless, even commenting and subscribing does a lot. And actually a surprise cameo for this video. I don't know how we did it did cost a bit, but we actually have Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson actually for this video. It's crazy, right? To actually give their opinion on QuadDrive. So with that being said, I want to give the opportunity to The Rock to talk in this video to say their opinion on QD.
And I've got to say, in all honesty, it's the biggest piece of dog shit that I have ever heard.